Good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to see many familiar faces. Thank you very much for coming. This event is being live streamed. So hello to all of you sitting on your rocking chair at home or maybe behind your desk at work. My name is Pierre Valentin. I am a partner at a law firm called Constantine Cannon. I specialize in art law, but I know very little about NFTs. I've got this book to prove it, The NFTs for Idiots. Actually, I'm reading it. It's pretty good, so I recommend it. The goal of today was really to try and learn from each other. This is still a relatively new space, and we've got lots to learn. So that's why we are here. I'd like to say thank you to Forsters for hosting us in this rather magnificent room. Thank you, James. James is a partner of Forsters. I'll introduce him in a minute. Catherine Hill, who is also a partner at Forsters and a founder of Artistate, unfortunately can't be here today. She was going to co-moderate our panel. She sends her regrets, for family reasons. Unfortunately, she can't be with us. Now, Artistate, just for those of you who have not heard of this relatively new project, it's basically a platform providing professional services to artists and their estates. It was born out of a collective experience of talented artists whose legacy was either destroyed or marred in controversy as a result of poor or no planning and not getting the right sort of professional advice. So we set ourselves up as a group of professionals to try and remedy that and provide as simple and cost-effective advice as we possibly can. Now, before I introduce our panelists, just a few ground rules. The event will last until 1:30. Then there will be a light lunch served in the room next door. The restrooms are outside, right, and then left. Please switch off or make sure that your mobile phone is not ringing. And there will be, obviously, we're a small group, so there will be opportunities for questions. It would be nice if you could say your name before asking the question and speak clearly so that everyone can hear, and keep it to one question, please. So everyone has an opportunity to speak if they want to. Now, our panelists, starting from my right, Misha Milovanovic is an artist, a wonderful artist, if I may say, working across different media, sculpture, paintings, and crypto art. You had your first drop, you will explain what that means, in 2021, I think. Yes. And your NFTs include virtual sculptures based on, but not replicas of, physical sculptures. James is a partner at Forsters. You do private client work. You advise on succession planning, family governance, and UK tax. And your specialist subject is crypto assets. So that's why you're here today. Nicola, just on my right, Nicola Goldschmidt is a tax advisor and head of private clients at Haynes Watts. And your specialist subject is tax and cryptocurrencies / NFTs. Immediately to my left is Camille Beckman. Camille is qualifying as a solicitor. She is currently working at Artistate. We're very lucky that she is kind of, in charge. We take orders from Camille. And Camille is also working on an NFT book project with Studio Robert Alice. And you've been working in this space, NFT space, for quite some time now. Then we have Nick Demure. Hello, Nick. Nick, you are a business and legal advisor at the Association of Photographers. Your background is a mix of photography and law.
Photography mainly. Yeah.
Photography mainly.
And law latterly.
And law latterly, which is a great combination. But you've been a professional photographer all your life.
Yeah.
And you advise the AOP, the Association of Photographers, on NFT related.
All matters relating to copyright, licensing, anything. I mean, NFTs, I was just saying to Ed earlier, that's obviously a hot topic at the moment.
Yeah.
With people wanting to explore that space and work out what the implications are, how to manage it, all that kind of thing.
Wonderful. And last but not least, Ed Fornielis. Ed is an artist, London-based, who's been experiencing with NFTs since 2016, so an early adopter. A recent project, Finilia, is about living NFTs, also known as avatars, whose moods are tied to fluctuations of cryptocurrencies.
That's right.
Very large. Mood swings are very significant. Yes, exactly. Good. Okay. Well, without further ado, what I'd like to do is start by asking each of our panelists a question, and then we'll take it from there and invite questions from you, and I might have some questions, and we'll see how we go. So let's start with Ed. Ed, how does the NFT art space differ from the traditional art space?
I think we're trying to make sense of that at the moment. I come from the land of art, and I've made unconventional work in terms of its mainly film and its performance work, and it's stuff that's actually quite hard to sell, and it's always been a trouble raising capital in this space, and so it has a home in the art world. But I think like NFTs represent a way of raising funds that is completely new, and just trying to make sense of this at the moment. But yeah, it differs in a huge amount. In one way, NFTs are just a reinvention of painting, in a way that like paintings are the art objects that can interface with money, that are legible to money. And this is just creating legibility in a sense for digital work and digital assets. I think another main difference is the communities and cultures that sit around the work. I mean, so the art world is old, and it has its hierarchies, its layers, its gatekeepers. They are known, they've been institutionalized, and the economics that sit around it have also been quite known and established. And the people who are buying NFTs are truly completely different group of people with a different community and culture. Like the art world has tried to court tech money for decades now and has never succeeded in penetrating that. And NFTs come from the tech world as well as like a more of an online culture. And so we see this weird moment where there's this sort of dance between these two groups now, which is quite interesting to see play out. I don't know if that answered your question.
You have. Misha, how has NFT technology influenced your work?
I just want to quickly add to what Ed was saying. It's such a fertile and interesting space. Unfortunately, it's been a little bit corrupted because it had this massive kind of push through with the Beeple sale, which sort of totally blew out of the water more subcultural elements. To me, that was super exciting because there was a lot of new kids and different type of artists mixing it all up, and he had a real kind of when it was all pretty well. You've been in since 2017, which is pretty kind of like at the beginning of it all. While the sort of now we are at this pinnacle where everybody wants to jump in and make loads of money. While it was still forming, it was the most exciting, vibrant, sort of cultural entity that I was very excited about. For me, it's very natural to jump into NFTs because I've been experimenting with digital art since maybe 15 years, simply by applying different software applications, like starting with Photoshop, using just going for it. It's another medium where, as an artist, I'm sure if Picasso was alive, he will be playing with it. And I think some of you have seen the examples that David Hockney did with his iPad paintings. They were absolutely fabulous. So it's all about having yet another medium to expand experimentation. So I think, to me, that's super exciting. Of course, any opportunity to play and to create.
Thanks, Michelle. Now let's go a little bit more technical. Starting with James, perhaps. What's the legal status of NFTs, and what are the associated legal risks?
Yeah, so I mean, just to add to Misha's point, this has been a very exciting journey for anyone who's been involved in crypto or NFTs. It's been nothing short of a revolution. From my perspective, I'm not an artist. I'm looking at this from capital raising, as you were saying. I'm looking at this from, okay, how is this being monetized? NFTs and crypto generally, but we haven't seen the invention. I mean, the idea of a distributable ledger technology, that idea is so revolutionary. We've not seen the likes of that since the invention of the joint stock company 400 years ago. That's what we're living through. It's on that scale. But as a lawyer, coming in, as I say, capital raising, all these things that the artists can now do, that's fantastic. But when you look at the legal status of crypto and NFTs, until 2019, we didn't know what this was. We weren't sure whether it actually qualified as property. And there were lots of people saying that, to take it very technical, to be property, an asset has to be either a chosen action, which means that it's enforceable against someone. So shares, for instance, they're enforceable against a company. You have your shares, that's your property, it's enforceable. A chosen possession, like a painting, that's something you can touch and feel. Crypto doesn't fall into either of these categories. So people were really struggling with the idea of crypto as a new type of property. So again, it's this idea that this is something completely new. We have to completely reevaluate how we think about property and law. However, because we have a relatively flexible approach to law, certainly in this country and elsewhere, the courts were prepared to take this view that, okay, it doesn't fall into these traditional categories, but what it is, it's a new type, a third type of intangible property, that there is some precedent in this, because patents have been considered as this new type of property under the Patents Act of 1977. So there is precedent here, but this is a totally new beast. So it was in 2019 that we had this case in Singapore, a coin case, where they basically said, no, it is property. It meets all these characteristics of property, which include that it needs to be identifiable, it needs to be capable of control, it needs to have permanence. I mean, there's a question around a lot of blockchain technology, whether it can be permanent when it's so vulnerable. I mean, we've got clients setting up their own blockchain layer 1 protocols right now. Are they going to take off or not? Are those coins and tokens going to be permanent? But generally, people are comfortable that this is property, which opens the door to a lot of commercial possibilities, commercial certainty. In the NFT world, we've only just had the equivalent case, which was a case of Osborne v. Persons Unknown. So this is within the past month, I think, we've had this case. And that concerned a pair of Boss Beauties NFTs that have been stolen from someone's wallet and then the court said that yes, we can actually exercise a freezing order over these, so we can freeze that wallet because we're going to recognize NFTs as property. Because ultimately, I mean, that wasn't a surprising decision in many ways, because all NFTs are a different type of token standard. So fungible tokens, ERC20 tokens, they're interchangeable. One Bitcoin is, well, one Ether, better example, is worth the same as another Ether. NFTs, digital collectibles, they have to have that extra unique characteristics embedded in. So we now have a state of play whereby you can enforce rights. So if you're defrauded, you can exercise a freezing order, you can go to court, you can put NFTs into trust. So from a succession perspective, it starts to look a lot more interesting. It's hopefully a little bit more clear how they'll be taxed, but I'll let you speak on that. Perhaps you'll say otherwise. So that's where we are. Right now, at this point in time, we're comfortable in the legal status, and I can't see the courts changing their minds over that position.
Thank you, James. You mentioned tax. Nicola, that's
me.
your subject.
I will first of all say that my experience of anything artistic is using Photoshop to get rid of one of my chins. So, I don't think that counts. I look at this purely from the point of view of if it's got money, then the government's going to want to be involved somehow, somewhere. And if someone's making money, they're going to want to be involved even more because, it's jolly unfair if somebody's making money and they're not getting a cut. So I did actually do some prep like James. James brought some notes with him, and I brought with me the total amount of information that the Revenue have given us about NFTs, which really isn't an awful lot. It's mentioned twice in their entire crypto assets manual, although, to be fair, only NFTs are mentioned once, and that's to say, like James says, they're not interchangeable with each other, which is why they're called non-fungible. So, titles in the clue, folks. So you cannot swap one for the other, and it would be treated as exactly the same thing. Whereas, and then the other mention is to do with DeFi loans. So the guidance the Revenue gives us is really quite unclear. Osborne has been quite helpful to us in that it now tells us that crypto is property or NFTs are property. So the Revenue they've written a whole crypto assets manual that's been in place since February 2021. And it was updated fairly recently this year in March. And it talks mainly about what's taxable and how, kind of, maybe, it might be this, it might be that. You need to take advice. My fees are available, I've got cards somewhere. And so the position the government take are generally, if it's kind of a hobby, whatever you're doing, whether you're mining, creating NFTs, or you're dabbling in crypto, then it's probably going to be capital gains tax or perhaps losses at the moment for people dabbling in crypto. I'm sure that some of your avatars, Ed, are maybe not looking quite as sunny.
They're definitely not.
They're probably having bigger mood swings than I am at my age. And then if you're an artist developing NFTs and selling, like Misha and Ed, then they're much more likely to be business assets. But of course, there's no real guidance on this, so we have to look at what the badges of trade are. Are you doing it with regularity, frequency, intent? Because of course, if you're actually selling something, the VAT man's probably out there somewhere waiting, and along with the tax man on any other subject. So the Revenue are taking the full view, and as James says, people are putting them in tax in succession. There's all sorts of issues to think about. That nice young man in Wales who had all of his wallets on a hard drive that kind of accidentally got thrown into the tip. That's probably in November. It was worth a fortune. Fortunately now it's probably, he doesn't realise he's lost so much, but at one point there was an awful lot of money on there, and he's never going to be able to get that back. So what happens if that poor lady who had her NFTs hacked and stolen? What happens there? Can she claim a loss? So we get involved in things like that. You can put them into trusts and end of life, but you do need to think about how you're going to do that, how you're going to protect it from people, passwords, wallets, all sorts of things going on there. And of course, what happens if, for example, we have something that's happened fairly recently, all those people who bought all their bored ape yacht clubs who now got a lot less value in them, and they die, or they've died in between and they've lost value. So what's the probate value? What's going to happen now? And who gets what? So yeah, it's an exciting time to be around, isn't it?
Very
Actually,
exciting.
not just for all of you. I'm sorry, tax is my thing. It's really exciting to me.
Thank you, Nicola. Camille, let's talk about copyright. What copyright implications should artists be aware of when minting artworks?
Well, I think very much in line with what James and Nicola said, currently we don't have a new framework for NFTs yet, so we're doing our best to apply the rules that we have to this new scenario as much as possible. But what's really important to understand is that copyright applies to NFTs or crypto art like any other form of art. And quite often in the art world, what becomes an issue is reproduction rights, so where someone reproduces or copies a protected work, or communication rights, where someone communicates a protected work to a new public. So that's basically where you take a work and you share it with an audience that was not originally intended by the artist. What's really important to understand in terms of NFTs is how the actual visual bit is linked to the code, the code on the blockchain. And there are actually NFTs where the artwork is completely stored on chain, so where all the data is integrated into the blockchain. But most commonly in the art market, what happens is that you have your NFT and the code via something called a hash links to an image, which is actually stored somewhere else. So that's usually a cloud or a centralized server, or it can be an IPFS, which is basically a peer-to-peer file sharing system. And that matters for copyright. So for instance, if you, as an artist, you create your own work and you mint it and you have all the rights in the work, then that's obviously absolutely fine. But if you create a work where you borrow elements from other works, or you integrate another work, someone else's work, into your work, which for instance is quite often the case for appropriation art, and it's very, very common in the NFT space, you might run into problems. So for instance, there was a case of an artist called Robness, and he took an image of a garbage can and he made a GIF out of it. And it's called 64 Gallon Toter, and it was hugely successful. But the marketplace Super Rare took it down because they were worried, because the original image of this trash can was taken from the website of Home Depot. So the marketplace is worried that they were going to get a copyright lawsuit. It has now been reinstated because the work was found to be transformative enough, but I think it just shows that there are a lot more considerations here. And then the final case is where someone would take a work that they have obviously no intellectual property rights to whatsoever. So you basically take someone else's work and you mint it, and you're very likely to infringe someone's copyright in that case. So for instance, last year in November, there was this exhibition in London called Art Wars with the Star Wars Stormtrooper helmets that were painted by all these different artists. And then following the exhibition, the founder minted all the works as NFTs, and he sold them for, I think, around $7 million on OpenSea. And very shortly after the sale, they were all taken down. And now about 12 of the artists are expected to file lawsuits. So this is something to be super cautious about. I think a lot of people still think the NFT world is like the Wild West and you can do whatever you like, but you actually can't just take anything and mint it if you don't have any rights to it. So yeah, I would say the bottom line is that copyright in NFTs is actually very similar to copyright with any other art, and you do really need to make sure that what you use, you actually have the right to use. I would say the additional burdens for right holders would be that it can be very overwhelming to monitor infringement in the marketplaces. It's a very new environment and things move very quickly. There's a lot of anonymity, and of course, quite often, I think a rights holder's best shot is to send a takedown notice to a marketplace. But then you kind of put yourself in their hands. You have to rely on them being responsive. And dealing with it in a good manner.
Thank you, Camille. Nick, are NFTs linked to artworks here to stay, or is it just a fashionable trend? I mean, Camille used the word, a lovely word, the visual bit.
That's a very good question, and to be honest, I think it would be presumptuous of me to say one way or the other at this point in time. I want to explore something though a little bit that Camille said, if I can, about the aspect of copyright, because actually a lot of those issues in terms of attribution, appropriation, republishing, they're not new, the problems that are associated with that. And also the act of minting an NFT, I mean, the phrase NFT, non-fungible token, the token itself does not have to have that original artwork, whatever it's referencing, within it. It's a receipt for something. It can be something individual. Now, my point is, and this may be something that James can throw some additional light on, is that if somebody were to tokenize another piece of artwork, but not wrap that up within the actual blockchain ledger entry itself, are you republishing? Are you doing a new communication to the public? Are you committing copyright infringement, essentially? Or is that minting process outside of the scope of current legislation, whereby that does not form, that's not an act that can be taken to court, prosecuted for copyright infringement? That's something that concerns me, because there are two different mechanisms at play here where one can wrap something up. And I don't know, Ed, how you manage this, whether your NFTs or the artworks are encapsulated within that?
We're not. I mean, actually, one of the people that I work with does SVGs files. So literally the images are on the blockchain. We've orchestrated it because they're live and we want to update them. So we have them they're updatable, essentially. They are completely separate. And we plan on, we're kind of unconventional way that your NFT might suddenly change one day. You might open it up and it might be completely different.
I get, referencing what Misha and Ed said at the beginning about this kind of new space to explore. I totally get from an artist's perspective why that's quite exciting. And from my perspective, dealing with photographers, I suspect a lot of photographers have initially gone into this fueled by Beeple, fueled by some of the other headline sales that have taken place. And anecdotally, there's a lot of conversation out there on the internet that those sales have been artificially manipulated to purposefully to kind of kickstart this. Why we're here? It's become a new bubble, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So going back to the question you asked me about whether they're here to stay or not, I think in some form they will be, and there are aspects of NFT technology such as smart contracts and the ability to have royalties that are automatically transferred. Some aspects of that technology which exist on blockchain, I think could work to all creators' benefits. Obviously we have the artist resale right, but that's only applicable to artworks over a certain value. Is it €1,000, I think? So, there's lots of activity that happens under that level where people are selling, reselling, and artworks might be being traded, where the original creator doesn't benefit from that kind of thing. However, I also know anecdotally that platforms that where the NFTs that have been minted and have been resold, that smart contract technology has not delivered a royalty back to the original creator. So, mechanisms, and I don't know if Misha and Ed, maybe you're aware of examples of that as well. But certainly, there are problems associated with this. And we haven't even spoken about the environment yet, by the way, but that's a whole other sort of whole other topic. But I think there are a lot of problems still associated with how this is tied into crypto. Ed, you mentioned at the beginning that this was a tech sort of, a tech idea, as it were, pushed into the creative space. It's not something that creators have come up with themselves and are now thinking this is a great new way for us to sort of to produce work, to kind of get in front of a new audience. This has been sort of, my personal opinion, and maybe I'm more cynical than some of the others on the panel about this, but it feels to me very much like this has been something that has, underneath it all, has the fundamental aim of it is to get more people involved in crypto. That's where I see the sort of the driver for it. There are benefits, don't get me wrong, absolutely, in terms of how artists and creators can manage the production of what they make, and I've alluded to that, smart contracts and that kind of resale royalty. And that's something that, some of you may know Jaron Lanier, who was originally, way back, maybe 10 years ago, was a proponent of everything on the internet should be free. He has now come full circle and now realises that actually that completely undermines the whole incentive for people to create in the first place, which is why we have copyright. That's the incentive to be able to monetize it. And this idea of micropayments was something he thought of many, many years ago, which actually is now linked, I think, to this idea of smart contracts within the NFT space. And it's, I think it's too early to say one way or the other. I suspect, yes, they will continue to be there. I think the big problem, with it being linked as it is to crypto, and anybody that watches crypto or anybody that has bought crypto will have seen its value just absolutely go through the floor. Will that come back to what it was? I don't know. I mean, I'm not a financial expert by any means, but somebody else in the room might have a better idea than me on that.
Well, I can certainly say clients aren't concerned about it.
They're not.
No. And some of these guys are hedge fund guys who are now crypto guys, and they're just shorting the crypto market. So they're probably having a fantastic time at the moment. I'm seeing people investing more at the moment, if anything, because they sense opportunity. But just to respond to your question, if I understood it correctly, I mean, the act of tokenization itself, I don't think is anything wrong with that. So if I tokenize this camera, then all I'm doing is taking whatever data we can sort of that represents this. So the characteristics of this camera, right, that we would need to embed in a crypto transaction in the metadata that Camille was talking about. That metadata is stored off-chain normally, but then that is represented by this public key information. I can access that with a private key, but that's all I've done. That's private to me, so nobody needs to know that I've done that. It's academic. It's the exploitation that is important, and the extent to which you exploit somebody else's copyright and IP. That's where it becomes contentious.
So if I can quickly add, that was really interesting. Well, it's super debatable in the way that, like early scratching from the music industry in the 80s, where things were sampled. So in terms of law, this could be perceived in a way that, how much of a sample can you use in order to then have a copyright issue? But an artist will run with it regardless of the copyright or not, because we are all continually influenced by each other's work, even to the point where, one might not even be, there is a distinction between stealing something and being influenced by it. So there are various, I would say, rabbit holes to go down. But in the meantime, there's also a field that is incredibly creative that just keep perpetually kind of growing. And in a way, I think if I understood correctly, is that, the crypto, you might argue it in a sort of cynical sense was created, or the digital art or the NFTs were created in order for crypto to grow. It is just an organic progression of creativity that at some point this was going to take its own life. And yes, it is hugely governed by the crypto bro community and the Bitcoin investors. But in a way, it's just given it a little bit of gas on a pedal of creativity, and the rest is, it's become all these different variations of art and sort of new language in a way.
Can I add something to that? Because I actually think you were saying that sort of the tech world has sort of invaded the art world, and I think that there are probably some areas where that's true, and sort of artists feel like the pressure that they have to hop on this bandwagon and they have to make NFTs. But actually, I think where this whole thing started was its own community, and it grew very organically, and it was people who actually had an artistic and a technological background. And I mean, if you look at the OG NFTs, I mean, you have things like trading cards, like rare Pepe's, which is just, you know, it's its own world, I think, which you could neither classify as purely art world or purely tech. I would say it's somewhere in between.
Totally, 100%. That's why it's so exciting, because it is definitely disrupting the sort of narrative of the traditional system, which is like, oh, you got to create this and it's going to be sold for this much money, and we are the people that will tell you how much money it costs. And, you know, it has so many layers that are incredibly exciting, and yet so many pitfalls as well.
I think, I mean, and it also occurs to me that lots of discussions about NFTs talk about the frameworks, they don't talk about the actual artwork.
Yes and no, but you're absolutely right. It began as very kind of street vibe art thing, whatever, I can't really describe it. And it had a lot of designy street language as well as digital language, you know, which you can argue is quite simplistic and it's all based. But it also belongs to the kids. That is the generation that will create art from. I mean, Ed could talk about that a bit more, because you're using the kind of, I don't know, whatever they call GIFs or.
Yeah, I mean, I just.
From the creative perspective, you're obviously discussing the language that's available to the younger generation.
Yeah, I mean, for me, these works are about the emotional bond that traders and everyone has to unwieldy abstract structures. I mean, finance is an easy one. Like the ups and downs, you can't help but be emotionally kind of connected to it. And so for me, like looking at the culture and this sort of almost like financialization of everything, which I think NFTs and crypto are more broadly part of, and you can look to Uber and, you know, everything is part of that general trend. So like I'm interested in like commenting and looking at that. Yeah, I don't know. Another thing I was thinking about is how artists, at least the way that I work, I feel like we've worked our way into middle management. Like I often like get stuff. I'm working with a team now. I have 20 people like modeling and animating. In other projects, I've also had people doing this. And then now we face this terrifying legal and financial implications of this. It's like we raised and in this project we raised money for production, and then suddenly I'm an artist. I don't have expertise in this field. Like I'm really lost, and there's this element of like territories. Like the team I work with are all over the world, and so like, okay, well, where do we place ourselves? Like trying to figure that out. VAT scares the hell out of me. I'd be interested to hear, that direction, what you guys are thinking.
Well, tell us about VAT. I mean,
I still think it's 17.5%. So the VAT team, it's what I tell the VAT team, so they don't talk to me. I mean, the trouble is, unfortunately, when you generate profits or when you're generating income of over a certain amount, then unfortunately you have to start adding VAT to it. But part of your problem as artists, of course, is you're selling all over the world, and you don't necessarily know who you're selling to.
Definitely don't.
Because it's on it's on a platform that you don't know where anyone's come from. So how are you supposed to know which of your purchases are in the UK? Because obviously that would be VATable, or outside the UK, which is obviously not going to be a VAT transaction. So we've actually had this with one of our own artists, and the guy's just sitting there going, all right. And I'm going, oh, VAT man, tell me. And we've actually just had to take a view to a certain extent. We don't think that most of them have been bought in. I mean, if you look at where most NFTs of the type he's got were sold, they were not in the UK. So we know roughly that we can imagine we can take a view, and then we can take a reasonable view and hope the revenue are actually reasonable to us, back to us. And as long as we've made an attempt, I think they're kind of at the moment accepting of that. But it is very much it's not like it is in other countries. We can actually talk to the inspector. God, trying to get the revenue on the phones and like that. So, it's some of it is taking a view, unfortunately, and the type of thing, I mean, to go back to some of the other points, people who believe in this believe in digital currencies, crypto, NFTs, whatever. And so, like your clients are probably in it because they can short it and do all sorts of things clever with money. And but other people, unfortunately, aren't clever with money and have lost their shirts and stuff because they've bought into, dare I say, like people who bought Paco Rabanne's Impossible Dress collection. So they actually NFT'd it. It's a collection it's how he broke into designing in 1960s. And they produced NFTs of these 12 impossible dresses. So people have paid £100,000 for a dress that doesn't actually exist, they cannot possibly wear because there isn't one, but you can go to Selfridges and be fitted for a replica dress. So I have to be honest, the thing that first came to mind was the Emperor's New Clothes, but that probably just shows my age. So there's all sorts of things and people have done things just to monetize them. Jack Dorsey's first tweet, and then when the chap tried to sell it, I think he was offered less than 6,000 for something he paid 2.9 million or whatever for, because it's not like you can't go onto Twitter and see Jack Dorsey's first tweet if you wanted to.
But Nicola, given that everything is anonymous on why do we need to care about tax? Because the taxman can't check on you. It's impossible.
But they do, unfortunately, because
how can they
these
do that?
things go through brokerages.
But because it's written in...
it's written on the ledger. It is...
Therefore, technically, you can forensically trace it down because it is actually on the...
and that's what they've done with Bitcoin. When people have been hacked and had to pay Bitcoin to get their stuff back, they actually... someone charged 69 Bitcoin and they got 63 of them back through tracking it digitally. Because it's on the blockchain, in theory, the blockchain is immutable and can't be changed because every computer has to agree to change it all across the world. So although technically it's anonymous, when things are purchased online, it is possible not necessarily to track the seller, which is your issue for you two, but to work out who's selling something, where they're resident, where they're living. And for artists, you're not going to hide yourself because you want people to buy your art. So you're visible much more than other people.
All your transactions, sorry, Nico, to interrupt, all your transactions are visible. So therefore, nobody can say, I sold this for, I don't know, X amount of ETH. When actually, as a matter of fact, if you just type it in the computer, you'll be able to see it in OpenSea what this thing is sold for. So there's I just have a quick question for lawyers. What would you do if a gallerist comes and said, I have a bunch of Picassos, I want to NFT them? What happens then? Or Andy Warhol or any of the artists that
I suppose it depends how you want to do that. So you could say we've got a bunch of Picassos and we're going to set up a fund, and then people could invest in the fund and but it's a tokenized fund, so actually you're getting tokens. And then they could have token holders' rights, so they can vote over what to do with these items, whether to loan them to a gallery or sell them or whatever. But there are different ways of doing that. So it'd be interesting to talk about DAOs briefly. So decentralized autonomous organizations. The idea that it's a community endeavor. You raise money for a specific project, which could be investing in art. It could be to create a virtual gallery. So you raise funds by issuing tokens, but it's all governed by smart contracts. There's no company in charge of this. You could have you and your friends in background notionally promoting this, but it's completely, from a legal perspective, there's nothing there. But what you're doing is you're vesting power in the token holders who can vote over this. So whether it's a virtual gallery or whatever, they could be buying these interests, could be real world assets, could be blockchain assets, but you're creating this community. And I think there are so many opportunities for artists to exploit this. And I think the question is, do artists want to do this? Is it just seen as money grabbing, or is the fact that they're engaging with crypto full stop. Is that an attractive thing that the artists want to do? Is that, are you engaging with a sort of with a sort of cultural, if you want to call it a cultural revolution or a financial revolution? Do artists actively want to engage with that, or is it just a money-making thing? Because there are great opportunities with things like DAOs.
I mean, I found one of the most amazing aspects of it is that Discord, so there's a platform where people can have conversations, the communities that build up around projects and people engaging with your work is amazing. Like, you know, thousands of people all having a conversation about your work. It's kind of, that doesn't happen in the real world so much, or at least not in the same way. And yes, there is that financial incentive to be there, but some of the intimacies of that space are kind of fantastic. Yeah.
Could I ask a quick question?
I think I would like to invite questions from the audience because the clock is ticking. You had a question.
Yeah, I have a question for Nicola. So if a buyer is outside of the UK, should they be charged VAT for the purchase of an NFT?
No, because you only charge VAT inside UK transactions.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That was easy, right? That's fine.
I have a question related to that. If an artist is working on a 10,000 piece NFT project, how exactly would you work out what percentage of that project will be charged VAT on?
It's not because it's the sales. You'll charge. You have to charge VAT on the sales. Basically, you're not really charged VAT. You're acting as a tax collector for the government. So it's really difficult. You have to look at what's being sold, what sort of people would be buying them. You don't honestly know until you look at each project individually, unfortunately. You know, I thought, because I've got Dachshunds, little miniature Dachshunds, they're so cute. I thought, well, I could do NFTs, except I can't draw, I don't know how to do any of this. And I thought, you know, 10,000 of those would be rather nice. Sell them all to people who like Hello Kitty in Japan, that would be great, no VAT, and I'm sorted for life. But then, you know, I don't know what I'm doing. So it's really difficult to actually work out where your audience is based, as it were. So we just have to try and take a view, and that depends on really each individual sort of artist, where their art's generally going. So you must have an idea who likes your art, roughly which countries they're in, and the
Not
previous
with
buyers.
NFTs, absolutely. Ed, what's your experience? I mean, you
Well,
can't.
with where they're from.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in the Discord, you can tell a little bit about where people are from anecdotally. You can track IP addresses on the sale. That's like the one thing that might be a little bit concrete. But no, like the idea that you ask them to fill out a form, culturally
doesn't
within
work
this
in
thing,
that, does
it's
it?
like people don't like this.
So how exactly do you have like a tool that would? How would you base off the percentage of the?
At this-
Do you use something like
At this stage, there's no
just
tool.
nothing, so it's just a guessing game.
As long as you can try and be relatively reasonable, you know, saying no one in the UK ever bought one out of 10,000 is probably unrealistic. We just look at what sort of things they are and take a view at this stage, and you take it to the revenue, and as there's back and forth, you get a better idea of what's going on. But it's not something that we've had to do a huge number of times. Yes, we have some clients, and yes, we are advising on the VAT for those clients, but it is literally, hey, it's with the revenue, with anything to do with crypto at the moment.
One thing you can do is use Google Analytics to track IP addresses, so you can see how many hits are coming from different territories. And then
During the mint.
during the mint, or even just in general. So like if you have a site, you can see how much is being hit.
Just gives you some kind of evidence that you can wave in front of the revenue and say, look, 98% of them weren't in, the interest wasn't in the UK, so it's very unlikely that most people, and then it's something we can, it's only if they ask for evidence we have to do anything, but it gives us as much evidence as possible.
Good intent to have some
Yeah.
form of data.
Anything you can get that's going to support that view will help you. So Discord, things like that, if you've been on any of those, you've noticed that, a lot of people don't seem to be in the UK. It just helps provide the full picture, as it were.
Perfect, thank you.
You had a question.
Actually, just to to you on that point. I'm aware of a couple of projects where those large scale to 10,000 PFP projects where they're applying a blanket principle to all of them and just either charging the VAT applicable in their country, or they're not charging any VAT if there's none applicable within that country, that jurisdiction wherever it's registered from. Yeah. And then allowing, just sort of accounting for that, and then allowing the individual who's acquired it to either try and reclaim that VAT should they be able to. But I know it's one way of dealing with it, but it's sort of a blanket, blunt tool approach.
Yeah, I think the HMRC are around likely to think, well, you didn't sell any to a Brit, so.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point.
So, unfortunately, it's generally if you feed them a little bit, might be able to keep the rest of the steak.
Okay, that's good. The question I was going to ask actually was something I've been involved with is this like larger scale project, one artwork quite high value, but it's got three components. There's the NFT component, there's the sort of digital art component, and there's a physical component as well. So in that scenario, going back to the case that you mentioned earlier, James, where it found that NFTs were actually property in their own right, so you've got the NFT part of it, then the digital part, like editor work, which sits over here, and then the physical part. And this is actually looking at, there's a whole bunch of legal stuff around it, but actually from a tax perspective is the import duty for this particular client. What part of that is subject to import tax and at what rate? We've got to a conclusion, but it's in Switzerland, and I wonder whether it would be borrowed here as well.
I have to be honest, I'm a private client, I'm not the VAT person. We do actually have an import duty specialist in our firm. So if you would like to, I don't actually have any cards, I lied completely, but I'll give you my number and I can pass you on to someone. I don't know, but I know a woman what does.
Yeah, amazing. Okay.
Well, that reminds me of the Bill Viola and what's his name? The enslaving case 10 years ago, where HMRC argued that they weren't artworks, therefore they should be taxed as screens and cables and plugs, because that's what they saw when the thing was imported.
And that was exactly this. It's a similar kind of argument, like where do you attribute value?
That's right.
So the idea was they apply a blanket sort of percentage to artworks like this, so that you can't fully decipher.
Yeah. Any other question? Yes.
So I commissioned a piece where the artist had to draw on canvas so that he would then convert it to an NFT. But then he did that, gave me the NFT, but then he wanted to keep the original piece. I thought that he would either have to give that to me or destroy it, because I commissioned it anyway. I spoke with an IP lawyer. He said technically he doesn't have the rights to that.
Did you commission the NFT or the piece, the painting?
I sent him photos.
Were you specific and like, I want this to be a painting, an NFT, or which one?
I asked for the NFT.
Okay.
Eventually, he did send me the physical piece. The different artists say different things.
Did you have
Maybe you need to do the contract better to decide exactly what you're going to get. But there was a launch this week of champagne that, I know, £2.5 million or something, because obviously champagne's worth that. And you have an NFT and a bottle of champagne, but you can't own both at the same time.
Yeah.
And apparently, if the NFT comes into your possession with the champagne, you have to destroy the NFT or send it off into a pile of hinterlands of nowhere, never to be seen again, or presumably drink the champaign. Yeah.
That doesn't sound like a bad deal to me.
Well, I don't know whether would you drink the champagne? I'm quite torn actually on that one, I have to be honest.
I think the point is that there's no reason why the painting itself can't also be transferred as part of this transaction. Yeah. But usually when you buy an NFT, all you're buying is the data. You're buying a string of code, effectively.
A bit like a certificate of authenticity, really, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Like a deed to a house, really. You don't buy a house, you're buying a piece of paper.
I was just going to say, the IP lawyer said if the payment, if the NFT was seen as a token that will allow you to buy the physical, then that should be how it should be done. or that you're buying both together, or he has to destroy it.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of the printing world, where you there's a series of steps to get to the print, and the question is who owns the intermediate steps, like the proofs, and that can be a big issue if it's not dealt with by way of contract.
To be honest, I've never thought about that.
And it sounds from what you're saying as though the painting is a little bit like a proof leading to the print, which in this case is the NFT. And in my view, if you commissioned the NFT, the painting, which is like a proof, belongs to you. But
I would argue the opposite, actually. Because why didn't you produce the painting yourself if you had a photograph? Was it very technical? In which case you're using somebody's skill set to create this piece of work. At what point? It's a very interesting debate. But my initial feeling is that the artist has actually produced the work. There is an emotional connection to the work, and he's put his own signature to it, unless he's copied it hyper realistically bit by bit. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I like what you say. But I think we're perhaps confusing copyright, which is clearly with the artist, with the physical work, physical work object, which I think is arguable, belongs to the party who actually commissioned the work.
It's all in a contract.
Well, if there's no contract, the question, there's a big question mark. Hopefully there is a contract. But if there isn't a contract, that's where the debate lies.
I think the moral of the story there is you need to be very careful of what you make sure you put in your contracts.
Yeah. And that leads me to another question. What do you buy if you buy an NFT? I mean, do you just buy, because I've read, I see someone smiling here, I've read the auction houses contracts, if you buy an NFT at auction, there's a contract which the auction house produces. And I've read some of them, apart from the fact that to me it's gobbledygook, it's quite clear that the intention is you buy the NFT, you buy the code, what comes with it is completely, they tell you that that's what they think comes with it, but if actually instead of buying a cat you end up with a dog, that's not their problem, it's your problem. Which begs the question, what are you actually buying? Are you buying the cat? Yes.
As an auction house.
Yes.
I think we all went through this. I think everyone here has gone through a sort of period of just steep learning, apart from perhaps the artists who've been doing this for a long time, but certainly as lawyers. And I think one of the difficulties analysing this from anyone selling NFTs is to be very sure that those people who are buying the NFTs understand what it is that they're actually buying. Because the confusions don't end with just the buyer, as we've seen. They start with the commissioner. They can quite often even be with the artist who doesn't know what they're creating. And so I think we're, to some degree, we are all the blind leading the blind here. And this is quite a dangerous area, which makes me worry that unless we're very clear to the people who are actually buying these things about what it is that they're buying, the people who will benefit most from the NFT developments will be lawyers.
Can I add one thing? I think what's really important so that the actual NFT is basically, it's a digital receipt of ownership, and it can come with anything. It can come without anything. It can come with intellectual property rights. It can come with rights to physical work. It can come with certain benefits or privileges that are tied to the NFT, but it doesn't have to. So I think that's also where I would very much agree. It's super important to be very clear for the buyer and the seller to know exactly what it is you're getting, what actually is the NFT.
Sorry to speak again. So it's very interesting what you were saying actually, but one of my clients has actually has acquired a work from an auction house and actually is quite sophisticated in this space, but also doesn't really know what they bought, partly because they were given reps and warranties by the artist that there was no intellectual property infringement within their work, but the artist has a right to continue changing it, like Ed's work, which is interesting because they've since changed it to incorporate some logos which arguably could be seen as trademark infringement of some kind, or some kind of IP infringement. So are they then in breach, and who is responsible for that? Also, there are no obligations, there's no ongoing relationship or contractual relationship between, I don't think, between the owner of that NFT and the artwork and the artist, and yet they have this lifelong relationship where there's no obligation to actually make changes to maintain the artwork or anything else. So there's I think there's quite a lot of questions that are unresolved, and I think the courts are going to determine some of this.
One more question. Yes.
In terms of tax, am I right in thinking artists will be either taxed as capital gains or as business asset tax? Are they the two options?
No, it's not an option. If you're an artist developing artwork as part of your business, then that is trading profits. And if I was doing my mini Daxon thing, that would probably be me dabbling, because let's face it, it's not going to be my thing, unless I make a lot of money, in which case I'd consider a second run. That would be a hobby. So I'd probably pay capital gains tax on that. But it depends what you're doing. The profit motive would be in case of point with me, because I'd only be doing it because I think I could, do something. The fact you're creating or changing something. Normally, if you buy something and sell something, it's not considered to be a trade unless you're one of the people who bought lots and lots of toilet paper at the beginning of COVID, for example. That would be probably an adventure, what we call an adventure in the nature of trade, because it sounds good. But, if you were just buying a few toilet rolls to try and teach my dogs to jump over, that's not going to be the same thing. So if you're doing it as part of your business, it's going to be a trading profit. So what you've got when you've got NFTs, though, is actually more than one transaction, because you start with sterling or whatever currency you've got. Then you have to sell that in order to buy usually Ethereum. So that's one transaction. You sold sterling to buy Ethereum. So that's at a certain rate of exchange, whatever it is today. And I noticed that Ethereum's down 7.14% today compared to what it was presumably since it opened last night. Then you sell that in order to buy the NFT or create the NFT or whatever it is you're doing. And then, so you sold the Ethereum at that point, and between buying it and selling it, it might have changed in value because it's quite a volatile space. So you've actually got either a gain or a loss at that point. And that could be a trading profit if you're trading, if you're doing it as part of a trade, or if it's a capital gain, then it would be a gain in and of itself or loss at that point.
And that works vice versa, as if an artist launches an NFT project,
so when you
convert the
you sell the NFT, you've sold an asset. So for you, if you're an artist, it'd probably be part of a project, so trading profits, and then you can get the Ethereum, and then eventually the Ethereum's put into a pool. That is a fungible token. Fungible means exchangeable. So your Ethereum goes into a pool. And the interesting thing is, when you have a pool, it's an average. It's not sort of like you match the one you bought yesterday with the one you sell today, or the one you bought first with the one you sell last. The trouble with that is it tends to mean, and especially when you bought them and sold them quite quickly, you buy and sell. You're treated as selling the one you've just bought, or you might even be treated as selling the one you haven't bought yet, but you're going to buy tomorrow, which means you never realise the gains on the big ones till quite late down the line. So you might not have much gain or trading profit here when you're selling quickly. But when you come to eventually realise all of your Ethereum, you might actually have quite a big trading profit that you didn't anticipate because you don't analyse that pool, and I have software to do that for me. So, or you can use the sort of Coinly and stuff like that you can use, have their own calculators. So what you think you've got is what you're doing, or what you're thinking of doing is probably trading. So that would all come within trading profits, all of those transactions, or losses, obviously. And trading losses are good in a way because you can offset them against other forms of income to gain of other income to realise them, or you can carry them forward to set against trade next year. But if it's capital gains, it tends to be more fixed. So all those poor people who made lots of money last year, it must be awful for them making all that money, they had to pay all the tax. They, of course, have made massive losses this year and they can't get them back. So you can only carry forward capital gains losses forward, whereas trading losses you can carry sideways against other forms of income. So,
last word, Nick?
Yeah, thank you. I'm curious to know what everyone's thoughts are regarding the consensus mechanisms behind current blockchain technology that supports the majority of NFT trading platforms. I am, of course, talking about environmental aspects of this. Now, I'm fully aware that this is sort of, the caveat with this is that actually one's own environmental footprint we're all going to be vastly different depending on how we travel day to day, what our own sort of carbon footprint is. So I accept that, that has to be taken into account too. But, Ed and Misha as practitioners, I don't know what blockchains your NFTs exist on. I know that there are proof of stake blockchains that are coming through, which are obviously much more energy efficient than proof of work. There are other consensus mechanisms around as well that have yet to sort of be more mainstream. But I'm interested in other people's thoughts, including those in the room, actually, of people that might be.
I have one, actually. Rather than look at it from that perspective at the moment, where a lot of these larger projects you often see, if you look at their Discord or their websites, that they do carbon offsets, which I realise, of course, is something else. And they're able to, what I'd be really interested in is that the blockchain technology is enabling now, say, to track an object, say, from an aeroplane, from the point of its actual creation, right down to the nuts and bolts, to the point where someone actually takes the flight. So when you think about the possibilities of it tracking the carbon footprint from not just taking the flight, but the actual building of the aeroplane itself, there's also some positive things.
I totally agree with that. I mean, that makes for a super accurate sort of plotting of everybody's and everything's sort of movement, ironically. But again, I mean, clearly things are in flux still, and I think the trend will be that, proof of work will give way to proof of stake and maybe other consensus mechanisms as well, which I don't know enough about that. I know something about, but not enough about that. But, I like I say, the environmental aspects of this are currently something that, I think we should be concerned about. And, where possible, take steps to kind of modify that.
Oh, absolutely. And I think early on in the discourse on Clubhouse, there was many debates and many seminars and lectures around green technology, utilization of, basically people are trying to educate each other and come up with solutions. I'm very concerned about digital rubbish because there's an explosion of creativity that you can argue very basic, but I've got my curator's glasses on when I'm seeing the work. Actually, it's quite important to say all these things live somewhere physically. They live in little boxes, server boxes, which are in warehouses, and they have to be stored somewhere. So that is an absolute concern. And I think at present time, there's this maybe emotional picture that it's just NFTs, they're somewhere, but they're somewhere physically. And at some point, we'll be cutting trees to create more warehouses. But I know I've been following the progression of, the development of green kind of electricity when it comes to creation and NFTs. And I think it's really important to say, if you are going to mint your video, you're going to be burning vast amount of energy versus having an image, which is your JPEG that moves. So, yeah, it's a super important conversation.
I think, though, I think it's overblown to a large extent because so much activity is on the Ethereum network. I don't know what the market share is, but it's huge. Everything takes place on the Ethereum network, apart from maybe Cardano, Solana get a bit of market share. Ethereum is moving towards proof of stake very soon. It's not, if you're doing this on top of the Bitcoin network, I'd be very concerned. They tried to do NFTs on the Bitcoin network 10 years ago, colored coins and all that stuff. Vitalik Buterin is behind that, but they thought, no, Bitcoin is too limited. We've got to build this new thing, Ethereum. That is where all this is based, and it's basically proof of stake will be the answer to that, I think.
We have to bring this to an end. Thank you very much to our panelists, Misha, James, Nicolas, Camille, Nick, and Ed. Thank you very much. Thank you for attending. I hope everyone learned something. I certainly did. And thank you, Forsters. There is lunch, I think, in the room next door where we can continue to talk about these things. Thanks a lot.